you, Lainey Bernstein. Yeah, rise up 1,000 times in spite of the ache. Oh, man. I don't know about you, but yeah, that describes my family. And lots of times and ways and places, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're talking about our family of origin, because that's the place where so many of our ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, understanding the world were laid down, right? And so we have to come to a reckoning. Brené Brown says we have to come to a reckoning of this. We have to reckon with the stories of our family of origin, or the stories that we tell ourselves about life, about people, about others, about our situation, which, quite frankly, were laid down when we were what? 3, 4, 7, 10. And the problem, of course, is that those things that we learned in our family of origin, we now play out with our family and friends. We play it out in our communities, in this community, in the community of our workplace, in the greater community. We're playing it out in our country, and we're playing it out in our world. And so for us to release the fantasies and the stories, we have to actually begin to look at them so that we can free ourselves from them and actually show up the way that we want to show up, the way that we say we want to be. So one of my primal stories, the primal narrative from my life, being left out. So the second biggest way that this showed up in my life was when my parents got divorced and my mother remarried. So when my parents got divorced, I was 11, and my sister and I, our response was, really, what took you so long? So it was actually a very good thing. It was healthy. My father was abusive, and so my mother really took our lives in her hands and moved us out into safety. And for the next couple of years, my sister and I will tell you that that was the best part of our growing up, was those 2 years that we lived with my mom. And my mother tells that story really differently. She does not feel that at all. And actually, she found it very traumatizing and very challenging because, of course, she had to go to work and all those things. And so she married. She remarried. She remarried a family friend, somebody that we'd known since I was 5. Actually, I was the one who introduced them because one of his sons I met in kindergarten. And we became fast friends. And so we were family friends, and then ultimately they got married. And so there were 4 of us then living under the same roof, two boys, 2 girls. They thought, oh, we're going to do the Brady Bunch. You know, we were all the same age. Yeah. The problem was that my mother and my stepfather had very, 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 very different ideas about how children should be raised and how they should behave. So within 6 months, the stepbrother that's closest to my age, that was my best friend when I was growing up, he moved with his mother in California. 6 months after that, his older brother managed to get a place at college in California, as far as he could get, so he left. And 6 months after that, my sister graduated from high school, and she wrangled with my dad to go for a year in Germany to live with my relatives, go to work, have that gap year in Germany. And there I was, left behind, left out of this mass exodus. And of course, what had been happening during all that time and why everybody was fleeing is that my mother and my stepfather fought incessantly over us kids. My mother will actually tell you that, because I shortly after that then ran away, because I was not going to stay there, she would have said that saved their marriage, because they didn't have to fight about us anymore. But through all of that process, one of the things that that became very clear to my sister and I is that my mother had chosen her husband over us. She kept choosing the way that he would raise us rather than the way that she did. And because I was the one that was left behind, I endured quite a long period of time of that, and constantly feeling left out, constantly feeling like my mother was choosing to be different than I knew her to be, choosing her husband over me. And ultimately, because of that and a few other things with him, I ran away. And that became my primal narrative, being left out. So I went on to have a son of my own, and I had, during the time of raising my son, 2 failed relationships. And I can tell you what was wrong with both of those people in great detail. I'm very clear about that. I know exactly why the relationship didn't work because of them. So as the second one was ending, and I was pretty sad about it because I really thought it was a good thing, I thought, okay, well, both of these relationships feel really similar to me. But what's the common denominator? Oh, that would be me. Oh, hello. And I realized upon reflection that I had absolutely recreated the same triangle in my own home. Both of my previous partners and I fought incessantly over how to raise Jason. And the only thing that I did differently is that I promised myself that I would choose him, that I would raise him how I believed he should be raised, and that I wouldn't abandon that for someone else. But otherwise, I perfectly recreated this triangle in my own home. And I'm a pretty conscious being. I've been on this path for a while. And it was much easier to always make somebody else wrong, right? And I had a lot of agreement about how it was somebody else's fault, not mine. So it was in what Brené Brown says, taking a reckoning, that really allowed me to look at it. Allowed me to look at it without shame or guilt, certainly not proud of it, but this is what we do when we're not paying attention. When we don't really pay attention to our own feelings and to the ways in which we're being triggered, the unconscious patterns and the ways in which we're responding. When we're not paying attention, we just keep playing these stories out over and over and over again in different ways. And so the first thing that Brené Brown talks about is that we have to have a reckoning with ourselves, with these stories. And of course, this term reckoning is a navigation term. She says, in navigation, the term reckoning, as in dead reckoning, is the process of calculating where you are. To do that, you have to know where you've been and what factors influenced how you got to where you are now. Things like speed and course and wind. Without reckoning, you can't chart a brave new course. Wait a minute. Without reckoning, you can't chart a future course. In the rising strong process, we can't chart a brave new course until we recognize exactly where we are, get curious about how we got there, and decide where we want to go. Ours is an emotional reckoning. So we have to take a reckoning. How did I get into this place with these 2 failed relationships? So we have to recognize where we are, and we have to begin to see ourselves and see what's going on, and then get curious about how we got there. I began to have to ask myself questions about it and to look at it, and finally then to decide where we want to go, to decide on a different way of being in relationship, to decide on a different way of showing up in work, to decide on a different way of responding to failure, to challenge, to conflict, whatever it is. Do you see? But without the willingness to look at it, to feel the feelings, not that the feelings are true, they're not spiritually true, but if we simply stuff them down or deny them, right, we know what happens then. We get sick or we explode, one or the other. So, my story about being left out actually started many years earlier. It actually started at our dining room table. And this was revealed to me when I went to my first counselor. I was 13 years old, and he said, so describe to me about, what it was like when you were growing up. Tell me about dinner time. And dinner time was, well, my dad would have some big, rage about his day and the horrible people and what didn't work and, calamity and a big to-do about it. My mother would try to smooth that all over. Then she'd say a few things about her day. Then my sister would, run off into some big story about whatever thing, and always, dramatic and big and huge. And then dinner was over. And I was left out. I was invisible. And so for people who think of me as being loud or pushy or strong, I had to learn that at the dining room table, because if I didn't do that, I did not show up. And I didn't exist. And I wasn't heard. And I didn't count. And so this story of being left out started in my childhood. And I began to play this out over and over and over again, so much so in the Galapagos Islands, on this beautiful vacation in the middle of a nature documentary, I sat at the table in the cruise ship. I'm being left out. Those people, they're talking to each other, but they didn't say hi to me when I sat down. They went on the boat, and they had a good time, but nobody talked to me. Oh, my God. I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I'm having the trip of a lifetime, having the experience that is so amazing. Until you see Karen's pictures. I mean, really, and I am pouting. And what I realized, of course, is I was collecting evidence. I was collecting evidence, because those people who didn't talk to me when I first sat down, do you know when they finished their conversation, they turned to me and they said, so, Petra, how you doing? But I didn't pay attention to that, did I? I paid attention to all the ways in which my story was being validated. But, thank God, I know to be curious. Wow, why am I feeling this way? What in the world is going on? And I realized that I had brought my left out story to that dining room table. And my job was to explore my own feelings, because first of all, I realized that what I really wanted to do was I wanted to gossip with Karen about all the people on the boat. Well, she and he and of course, I know better, so I wasn't allowed to do that, right? I don't allow myself to do that because I know better, but ooh, man, did I want to. And that was my first clue, right? My first clue was what I wanted to do was I wanted to project it out on everybody else and gossip about all of them and how they weren't whatever, right? And these were amazing people. We had a couple from Singapore. We had a couple from Australia. We had 4 from England, although they were 2 couples that didn't know each other, and a couple of other Americans. And and some people from Switzerland that I'd been speaking German to, which was such a blast. I was having a great time. And so I had to really explore these feelings that were coming up. And then I had to ask myself, well, what's going on? Why do I feel this way? And ultimately, we have to ask the question, we have to wonder, well, where did it come from? Do you see? And in that exploration, it was like, oh my God, I'm sitting at my childhood dining room table. Okay, I'm a little too old for that. Thank you very much. But in that ability, first of all, to reckon with the story and to be curious, do you see that's the piece that allows us to unearth what's really going on? Not to pretend that the feelings aren't there, but also not to say, well, they're my feelings, therefore they're true. They were not true. I was not being left out. But I needed to look at and experience the feeling of being left out so that I could explore it. Do you see? And the two mistakes we make is either we say, well, I'm feeling the feeling, therefore it's true, or I'm not going to feel the feeling because I know it's not true. But by feeling it and then being curious about it, do you see, we reveal to ourselves the way that our pattern is playing out. And in that moment, in that very moment, do you see, we have the gift. We give ourselves the gift to rise strong. My pattern, if I'm pouting, is to withdraw. And so my rising strong was to simply engage with all of those people as if the story didn't exist. Do you see? So my choice was to stay connected. My choice was to keep reaching out. And I have almost all those people's emails. We had a fabulous time. But do you see, if I hadn't had the opportunity to make that decision, I could have spent the whole rest of the cruise having a pity party, and I would have come home and told you about those Australians and those people from UK and those people from Switzerland and right? Yeah. So this whole notion here that we're exploring is to have the courage to be uncomfortable. Brené Brown says you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't choose both. So the courage to be uncomfortable, what does that mean? I have to look at myself, right? I have to own my own story. I have to own the way the story has popped up and is now engaged, and that is that's where the feelings are coming from, or that's where a behavior is coming from. You see, I have to have the courage to be uncomfortable with that, and then I have to have the courage, if necessary, to actually talk about it with someone else. If there's, because it's not always just our own pattern. Sometimes there is actually something going on. But if I can tease out my story, right, now I have to have the courage to have the tough conversation or to be uncomfortable because I now have to say something or share something or engage in some way that's outside my comfort zone. Quite frankly, what I had to do was have the courage to be loving when I really wanted to pout. And I wanted to make other people wrong. Do you see? And that was uncomfortable when I first started because that was having to move through that habitual way of responding. So you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both. Now, one of the reasons why this conversation can be so difficult, I think, is that our families don't really teach us how to deal with conflict. Actually, the truth is, unless we do a lot of work with it, we deal with conflict today the same way our families taught us to deal with it. So when there's a challenge or a failure, or especially when there's a conflict, whether it's at home or at work or in a community, we're instantly like 6. If we're lucky, maybe we're 10. Sometimes we're 4. Not because our inner child is running amok, but because we're actually, that's how we've learned to behave. Whatever that conflict, whatever that way of being in conflict is, whether it's to rage, to scream, to withdraw, to become icy, to blame, to want to hurt back, these are all ways in which we have learned how to deal with conflict at home, and we take it with us. Now, it's fascinating to me, in the science of mind, our theology really supports us being conflict avoidant. I've done leadership trainings all over the country. I've worked with ministers and practitioners and communities all over the country. I'm actually going again in July to Southern California to work with the community. And I often do a conflict instrument. And time after time after time after time, the majority of the people that we do this instrument with in the science of mind are primarily conflict avoidant. And our philosophy supports that. We're just going to love and accept everybody. We're going to not be offended. We're going to always do our own work. We're going to assume that it's us. And we're going to not judge. And what we have a tendency to do is to withdraw, to not speak. The other thing I've noticed in the science of mind is how many of us grew up with an elephant in the room. I did. My elephant in the room was my dad was an alcoholic. I did not know that till I was 16 years old. It was never discussed, never talked about. We could never talk about my father's rage. All we could try to do was to manage it, to avoid it if at all possible. But that was the elephant in the room. Even when my mother got divorced and walked out, she never talked about it. Because, well, that was over and done with. Now we have to get on with our lives. We have to buck up and go for it. And so when there's an elephant in the room, do you see? We don't want to upset people. We don't want to offend other people. And generally, we don't want to do that, not because, let's be real, let's be really honest, not because we care about their feelings. Really, it's because we don't want to be uncomfortable with the response. We don't want to be uncomfortable with having to tell the truth. We don't want to be uncomfortable with the possible upset. And because we don't want to feel the negative feelings, right, we don't speak. We don't say. We don't talk about the elephant in the room. And so we become what's known as conflict avoidant. Brené Brown says that reminds us that the only way to get through these times is to lean into it. She says we have to lean into our discomfort. We have to lean into, because that's where the growing edge is, right? We have to lean into our discomfort. Ralph Waldo Emerson says exactly the same thing in his essay on circles. He says we're constantly drawing new circles in our life. Life is always about growing circles. And what happens is we grow into a new circle, and then we take time to kind of figure it out. And we learn. We're now a parent. We now have a job. We're now, falling in love, whatever it is. But there's a new, or we're just growing spiritually, emotionally. There's a new circle. And then we get comfortable with it. And then we continue to grow, and then all of a sudden there's an edge. And we are uncomfortable. We have to learn something new, try a new behavior. Well, don't try to change me. This is just the way I am. Because I'm uncomfortable with learning something new. But that's the very nature of a comfort zone, right? At the edge of it, to grow into the next circle, we have to move through our discomfort. We literally have to lean into it. And lean into the very things that frighten us. To not avoid conflict, to speak about what's going on, to share our hurt and our vulnerability. Karen and I just had we did one of those little twirls yesterday, and to the two of us, and all of a sudden I thought, oh God, and I just said, oh, you know what? The truth is my feelings are hurt. Instantly, it was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so let's talk about what happened. But do you see, until I was willing to just tell the truth, my feelings are hurt. Not you hurt my feelings, but no, my feelings are hurt. Wow, I'm noticing. I'm having an aha moment. My feelings are hurt. Sometimes that's what it takes, right? Because otherwise we want to just blast it out there. She calls it offloading. We Offloading. We want to offload our feelings out there because we don't want to feel it ourselves, right? I don't want to feel hurt. I don't want to acknowledge that I'm afraid, that I have pain, that I have anxiety. All that's negative, right? We don't do negative. We only do positive. But that's just, that's like not seeing the elephant in the room. There's no elephant. If I don't look at it, it doesn't exist. Ernest Holmes says you look a fact in the face and you deny its spiritual validity. He doesn't say you pretend it's not there. You deny that it comes from the divine. So my feeling of hurt didn't come from the divine. It got my feelings hurt. Okay, well, I can speak about that and I can grow through that. Makes us stronger as a team. Do you see? We have to lean into the discomfort. Or I can just disappear, withdraw, or make someone else wrong. So this leaning into the discomfort is this middle part. And it is the willingness to speak about the elephant in the room. Always a useful question. What's the elephant in the room? What's the elephant in the room in your home, in your relationship, in your family? What's the elephant in the room at your work, around your team, the table at your team? What's the elephant in the room? What's the elephant that's not being spoken about? What's the elephant in the room when you have a volunteer meeting and it's not going perfectly? It does that, Even here in this spiritual community. Damn, I know we're not perfect yet. We haven't turned pink and transcended. So what do, right? We bring all of that familial stuff to the table. And we can play it out the way we've always played it out, or we have the opportunity to use this as our spiritual laboratory, to grow through it, to lean into the very discomfort. Whether it's to own my story, whether it's to tell my truth, whether it's to ask for help. Do you see? We have the opportunity to do that. And that's one of the reasons why we get together and we work on stuff together. You think it's, so you can pass out the bulletins or do community service and stuff like that. No, it's not about any of those things. We do stuff together so that we can grow. That's why we do stuff together, so we can rub up against each other and have a safe place to examine our feelings, be curious about what's going on, and have the courage to be uncomfortable. So sometimes right now, I think there's an elephant in the room here at CSLDallas. And and so I think the elephant in the room is spirituality and politics. We shouldn't talk about it. It's not okay. Ooh, man, I can tell. My heart is racing, my palms are sweaty, right? I'm very, very, very much aware that in having this conversation, my primal story, my primal narrative is activated. Because if we have this conversation, you might leave. And so over and over and over again, do you see we're faced with having the courage of our own discomfort? Because I really believe that the science of mind is something to give and to add to what's going on in our world today and in our culture today. And I struggle over and over and over and again to how to speak about it, how to address it, and not have it thrown in my face while all you're doing is being political. When it seems to me that there are deep and abiding things going on that are so embedded in the truth of who we are, which is one. And when we harm each other and we harm the planet, we are harming the divine in its magnificence as us. And I think the science of mind teaches us how to think, not what to think. Teaches us how to think. And I'd like to teach all of us how not to be consumers of the sound bites, but citizens. People who are engaged from their heart and their values. Our global vision gives us values. It's a value statement of our spiritual understanding and what that means about how we are to show up in the world. Now, I'm not going to stand up and tell you how that should be done. That's something that does have to be wrestled with in policy making, in elections, in marching, in praying, in all of the different ways that each of us get involved individually. But I am going to say that I believe science of mind has a way of thinking about it that gives me hope for the future. Do you see, I think science of mind teaches us to think about it from a spiritual point of view, from a place of oneness, from a recognition that each and every person, our planet, every being on it is part of the divine. And our teaching, the deepest ethics that we have in our teaching is harm no one. Now, we don't always know what that looks like. And we don't always know that sometimes we make a decision that we think is really good that actually 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years from now is harmful. We're not perfect. But by learning how to think about things clearly without the veils of our family of origin, of our cellular belief systems that we maybe grew up with. Do you see, we have the possibility of meeting heart to heart, soul to soul, mind to mind in an open space with each other here, in our differences, in our diversity, in our various ways in which we think these issues can be addressed, and in the world. It is my deep belief that the science of mind is a light, a beacon of possibility, and that it's not only something that we can do, but for me personally, it's something that I feel compelled to do. Karen and I have had a lot of conversation about this. What is ours to do individually, as ministers, as leaders? What is CSLDallas's to do? And you see, just even standing up here and talking about it, I'm pressed up against my own discomfort. But I don't know how else to do it. I don't know how else to do it with you. I don't know how else we do it together. And do you see, by having these conversations, we're having these conversations at every level at Centers for Spiritual Living. From the president and the spiritual leader into communities, and at every level, we're having these conversations. What is ours to do? How do we bring the light? How do we be for this unity, this oneness, this deep love and respect for each other and the planet without being against someone? How do we be for the ideal? Isn't that what we teach? Hold the mental equivalent before the ideal and know that the manifestation will take care of itself. That's the law's job. How do we be for the ideal that we seek without being against someone or something? This is the task. And I think fundamentally, ultimately, do you know, I believe that we are growing up science of mind as a philosophy. Now, I don't know if you realize that Christianity didn't really become anything for 300 years after the teachings of Jesus. 300 years it took. And even then, the first greatest theologians didn't show up until 500, 600 years later. We're not even 100 years old. We're still trying to figure out. Ernest Holmes didn't say, here it is, do it this way, you can't ever think anything differently, right? He said, here's what I understand so far, and our job is to grow it in our own lives. What does that mean? To be curious, to ask questions, to explore, and to explore with each other. I think that's the other thing that Science of Mind brings to the conversation. We have such a deep belief that every human being is a part of the whole, that it doesn't matter whether we agree. It doesn't. What matters is that we are engaged with each other, and that we don't do our conflict avoidant or our projection or our, do you see those family patterns? Because here, this is a family, and we're going to bring all that crap to the table and grow through it. Our country is a family. Humanity is a family. Do you see at every level, these very tools are the tasks that are before us to work through it, to become who we say we are. Brené Brown calls this the messy middle. We are in the middle is messy, but it's also where the magic happens. Do you see, I don't know how to do this. That's not true. There were many years when this community was very, very, very involved in the peace movement. Very involved. I've been involved in the peace movement since the 70s. And yeah, and so I was going to say I don't know how to do this. That's not true. I do know how to do this. But I'm exploring how to do this collectively together with us in the issues that are facing us today, globally and in our country. And this is the middle messy. I don't know how to do it today. I don't know how to do it with you. I don't know how we're going to do it. Not every one of you are going to want to be a part of it, but you don't have to be. You just can't leave. And if you do, I'm not going to tell a story about it. This is the middle messy. And as I was reading about this with Brené Brown, she was talking about this, I thought, oh my God, this is the place where you've let go of this trapeze, but you haven't grabbed onto this one yet. And that is where the magic happens, isn't it? Think about when you've seen Cirque du Soleil or a circus. That's where the twirls and the flips and the heart in the throat until the bar is grabbed again. It is in that messy middle that the magic happens. And it's where the work is. And that's where we live most of the time, is in this messy middle. Sometimes we do it right. Sometimes we don't do it well at all. Sometimes we fail miserably. Sometimes we try to do it and it's a disaster. Okay. Can we pick ourselves up one more time? Then we've fallen down. Can we pick ourselves up individually, as a family, collectively, as a community? Brené Brown, she talks about two things. The gold-plated grit, which is when we just say everything's fine, always everything's fine, and the badassery deficit. She says, I know badassery is a strange term, but I couldn't come up with another one that captures what I mean. When I see people stand fully in their truth, or when I see someone fall down, get back up and say, damn, that really hurt, but this is important to me and I'm going in again, my gut reaction is, what a badass. There are too many people today who, instead of feeling hurt, are acting out their hurt. Instead of acknowledging pain, they're inflicting pain on others. Rather than risking feeling disappointed, they're choosing to live disappointed. Emotional stoicism is not badassery. Blustering posturing is not badassery. Swagger is not badassery. And perfectionism is about the furthest thing in the world from badassery. To me, the real badass is the person who says, our family is really hurting. We could use your support. And the man who tells his son, it's okay to be sad. We all get sad. We just need to talk about it. And the woman who says, our team really dropped the ball. We need to stop blaming each other and have some tough conversations about what happened so we can fix it and move it forward. People who wade into discomfort and vulnerability and tell the truth about their stories, they are the real badasses. Daring is essential to solve the problems in the world that feel intractable. Poverty, violence, inequality, trampled civil rights, and a struggling environment, to name a few. But in addition to having people who are willing to show up and be seen, we also need a critical mass of badasses who are willing to dare, fall, feel their way through tough emotions, and rise again. And we need these folks leading, modeling, and shaping culture in every capacity, including as parents, teachers, administrators, leaders, politicians, clergy, creatives, and community organizers. So much of what we hear today about courage is inflated and empty rhetoric that camouflages personal fears about one's likability, ratings, and the ability to maintain a level of comfort and status. We need people who are willing to demonstrate what it looks like to risk and endure failure, disappointment, and regret. People willing to feel their own hurt instead of working it out on other people. People willing to own their stories, live their values, and keep showing up. The truth is that falling hurts. The dare is to keep being brave and to feel your way back up again. So I'd like to contribute to the badass deficit, to the removal of it. I hope you do too. To do that, we have to acknowledge that it hurts, where the pain is, where the feelings are. Not that they're the truth, but they are happening. To stay in the arena. She quotes you all know it, the famous phrase, it's not the critic who sits at the side, it's not the this, it's not the that, it's the person who stays in the arena. Bloody and bruised, that's the person, right? She quotes that quote, I didn't pull it out. To stay in the arena, not to withdraw, not to not to fight, to ask for help, to be willing to be vulnerable and say, I don't know how to do this, I'm not sure, I need your help, we need to figure this out together. And to dare to tell your truth as you see it, not from your story, not from your past, not from your triggered emotions, but from that deepest place. And you see, when we do those things, then we take up our lives differently. We take up our lives being who we said we wanted to be, how we said we wanted to be. You know, when I sat at that table on that day, was the second day of our cruise, and I had this blinding moment of, it really is your choice, Petra. You can sit here in the story, or you can be the love that you said you are. Do you see? Over and over and over and over again, that's the personal responsibility that we take for how we show up in the world. And that's why we're diving into our family this month, because so much of that comes from our family of origin, and we continue to play it out. All we have to do is rise up strong one more time, then we fell into the story. Let us pray. And so as we turn within, we do know that there is one infinite power and presence, one life, one love. That life is the life of joy and peace, creativity. It is the wellspring of love that is the impulse of the universe. The created universe is the joyous explosion of this infinite, ineffable presence into form, into manifestation, into the beauty of creation, in all of its wonder and majesty, in the cycles of birth and death, in the beauty of awareness. That's life, the one life. And that life is your life and my life right now. It's the life of all people everywhere on this planet. It's the life of all beings. And so today we speak these words. Words of hope for our future. As we acknowledge the fear and the pain that people have on our planet today. We acknowledge the sense of separation, the less thans, the more thans. And we acknowledge that we don't understand it all. But in this moment, as we acknowledge these aspects of our human condition, I speak the word of love and truth, justice and peace. I speak a word of abundance and wholeness. Because this is the spiritual reality. This is the spiritual reality that we collectively join together, that we hold in our consciousness as the truth for each and every person. That this life, this one life, is in fact everywhere present. And as we know this, we know that by turning our attention to it, we call it forth. We have the courage to speak for it, the willingness to stand for it, the love to be it, wherever we go. Especially today, we hold in our consciousness those in London. We hold in our consciousness any person that has suffered an act of violence in our own backyard or across the globe. We look this fact clearly in the face. We see it as the human condition. But we deny the story that this is inevitable. We deny the story that this is the way it is and will always be. We claim the spiritual truth, the peace, connection, oneness, and love are the answer. Today we wrap our globe in this love. We hold our hearts open in this love. And we know that by being the love, we are manifesting the divine right here and right now. Knowing that this is the truth, we simply let it be. We let it go. And we affirm it together by saying, and so it is.